He was the preeminent scientist in a century dominated by science. The touchstones of the era, the bomb, the Big Bang, quantum physics, and electronics, all bear his imprint. He was Albert Einstein, the most famous scientist of the 20th century. Born on March 14, 1879 in Ulm-Wartenberg, Germany, Albert Einstein grew up in a secular Jewish family. His father, Hermann Einstein, was a salesman and engineer who, with his brother, founded a München-based company that manufactured electrical equipment. His mother, the former Poland coach, ran the family household. Einstein had one sister, Maja, born 2 years after him. Einstein attended elementary school at Lupendorf Gymnasium in München. However, he failed a lesson there and struggled with the institution's strict pedagogic style. He also had what were considered to be speech challenges, though he developed a passion of classical music and playing the violin that would stay with him into his later years. Most significantly, Einstein's youth was marked by deep inquisitiveness and inquiry. Toward the end of the 1880s, Max Tolman, a Polish medical student who sometimes dined with the Einstein family, became an informal tutor to young Albert. Tolman had introduced his pupil to a children's science text that inspired Einstein to dream about the nature of life. Thus, during his teens, Einstein penned what would be seen as his first major paper, the investigation of state of matter in magnetic fields. Hermann Einstein relocated the family to Milan, Italy in the mid-1890s after his business lost out on a major contract. Albert was left at a relative boarding house in München to complete his schooling at Lupendorf Gymnasium. Faced with military duties when he turned of age, Albert allegedly withdrew from classes, using a doctor's note to excuse himself and claim nervous exhaustion. With their son rejoining them in Italy, his parents understood Einstein's perspective but were concerned about his future prospects as a school dropout and draft dodger. Einstein eventually gained admission into Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich, superficially due to his Super B mathematics and physics score on the entrance exam. He was still required to complete his pre-university education first, and thus attended a high school in Aarau, Switzerland, helmed by Jost Windler. Einstein lived with the schoolmaster's family and fell in love with Windler's daughter, Mary. Einstein later renounced his German citizenship and became a Swiss citizen at the dawn of the new century. While attending school in Zurich, Einstein developed lasting friendship and an alliance, also meeting his future wife, Malva Merrick, a Serbian physics student. After graduating from Polytechnic, Einstein faced major challenges in terms of finding academic positions, having alienated some professors over not attending class more regularly in lieu of studying independently. Meanwhile, Einstein continued to grow closer to Merck, but his parents strongly against the relationship due to her ethnic background. Nonetheless, Einstein continued to see her, with the two developing a correspondence via letters in which he expressed many of his scientific ideas. In 1902, the couple had a daughter, Lisbeth, who might have been later raised by Merck's relatives or given up for adoption. Her ultimate fate and whereabouts remain a mystery. Einstein eventually found steady work in 1902, after receiving a referral for a clerk position in a Swiss patent office. Einstein's father passed away shortly thereafter, and the young scientist married Marina Merck on January 6, 1903. The couple went on to have two sons, Hans and Edward. The marriage would not be a happy one, however, with the two divorcing in 1919 and Merck having an emotional breakdown in connection to the split. Einstein, as part of a settlement, agreed to give Merck any funds he might receive from possibly winning the Nobel Prize in the future. He had also begun an affair some time earlier with a cousin, Elsa Nowotny, whom Einstein with during the same year of his divorce. He would continue to see other women throughout his second marriage, which ended with Nowotny's death in 1936. While working at the patent office, Einstein had the time to further ideas that had taken on holding his studies at the Polytechnic and thus cemented his theorems on what would be known as the principle of relativity. In 1905, seen by many as a miracle year of the theorist, Einstein had four papers published in the Annalen der Physik, one of the best-known physics journals of the era. The four papers focus on the photoelectronic effect, Brownian motion, the special theory of relativity, and the matter-energy relationship, thus taking physics in an electrifying new direction. In his fourth paper, Einstein came up with the equation E=mc2, suggesting that tiny particles of matter could be converted into huge amounts of energies, foreshadowing the development of atomic power. Famed quantum theorist Max Planck backed up the assertion of Einstein, who thus became a star of the lecture circuit and academia, taking on various positions before becoming director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics from 1913 to 1933. In November 1915, Einstein completed the general theory of relativity, which he considered a culmination of his life research. He was convinced of the merit of general relativity because it allowed for a more accurate prediction of planetary orbit around the Sun, which fell short in Isaac Newton's theory, and for more and expensive, explanation of how gravitational force worked. Einstein's acceleration was affirmed via observation and measurements by British astronomers Sir Frank Dyson and Sir Arthur Eddington during the 1919 solar eclipse, and thus a global science icon was born. In 1921, Einstein won the Nobel Prize for Physics, though he wasn't actually given the award until the following year due to a bureaucratic ruling. Because his ideas on relativity were still considered questionable, he received the prize for his explanation for the photoelectric effect, though Einstein still obeyed to speak about relativity during his acceptance speech. In the development of his general theories, Einstein has held on the belief that the universe was a fixed, static entity, as known as a cosmological constant, though his later theories directly contradicted this idea and asserted that the universe could be in a state of flux. Astronomer Edwin Hubble deduced that we indeed inhabit an expanding universe, with the two scientists meeting at the Mount Wilson Observatory near Los Angeles in 1930. While Einstein was traveling and speaking internationally, the Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, were gaining prominence with the violent propaganda and vitriolic and impoverished post-World War I Germany. The party influenced other scientists to label Einstein's work Jewish physics. Jewish citizens were barred from university work and other official jobs, and Einstein himself was targeted to be killed. In 1933, Einstein took on a position at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, New Jersey, and never went back to his native land. It was here that he could spend the rest of his life working on unified field theory. An all-embracing paradigm meant to unify the very law of physics. Other European scientists also left regions threatened by Germany and immigrated to the States, with there being concern over Nazi strategies to create an atomic weapon. In 1939, Einstein and fellow physicist Leo Szilard wrote to President Franklin D. Roosevelt to alert him of the possibility of a Nazi bomb to galvanize the United States to create its own nuclear weapons. The U.S. would eventually initiate the Manhattan Project, though Einstein would not take direct part of its implementation due on his pacifist and socialist affiliation. Einstein was also the recipient of much scrutiny and major distrust from FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Not long after he began his career in Princeton, Einstein expressed an appreciation for American meritocracy and the opportunity people had for free thought, a stark contrast to his own experience coming of age. In 1935, Einstein was granted permanent residency in his adopted country and became an American citizen a few years later. During World War II, he worked on Navy-based weapon systems and made big monetary donations to the military by auctioning off manuscripts worth millions.
After learning of the 1945 bombing of Hiroshima, Japan, Einstein became a major player in efforts to curtail usage of the A-bomb. The following year, he and Schiller founded the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists, and in 1947, via an essay for the Atlantic Monthly, Einstein imposed working with the United Nations to maintain nuclear weapons as a deterrent to conflict. Around this time, Einstein also became a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, seeing the parallels between the treatment of Jews in Germany and African Americans in the United States. He corresponded with scholar, activist Webb Du Bois, as well as performing artist Paul Robinson, and campaigned for civil rights, calling racism a disease in a 1946 Lincoln University speech. After the war, Einstein continued to work on his unified field theory and key aspects of the theory of general relativity, such as wormholes, the possibility of time travel, the existence of black holes, and the creation of the universe. However, he became increasingly isolated from the rest of the physics community, whose eyes were set on quantum theory. In the last decade of his life, Einstein, who had always seen himself as a loner, withdrew even further from any sort of spotlight, preferring to stay close to Princeton and immerse himself in process ideas with colleagues. On April 17, 1955, while working on a speech to honor Israel's 7th anniversary, Einstein suffered an abdominal aortic aneurysm. He was taken to the University Medical Center at Princeton for treatment, but refused surgery, believing that he had lived his life and was content to accept his fate. "I want to go when I want," he stated at the time. "It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share. It is time to go. I will do it elegantly." Einstein died at the University Medical Center early the next morning, April 18, 1955, at the age of 76.